Security officer tries to humiliate black woman, but she's secretly an undercover TSA inspector. Meet Yolanda Brooks, a soft-spoken traveler, standing in line at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, just another passenger, or so it seems. She catches the eye of a scowling security officer named Ron Carter, who's always eager to show off his authority. When Yolanda calmly hands over her ID, Ron's simmering prejudice comes to a boil. He singles her out, determined to show her and everyone else that he's the one calling the shots. What Ron doesn't realize is that Yolanda is no ordinary passenger. She's an undercover TSA inspector on a secret assignment, poised to catch discriminatory behavior at the source. The stage is set for a showdown. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport bustled with its usual morning energy. Suitcases rumbled across tiled floors. Families clustered anxiously around the check-in counters, scanning the ever-changing departure screens. The aroma of coffee and fresh pastries wafted from the food court, but the air near the security lines carried a different scent altogether: nerves. Ron Carter arrived at his post exactly 15 minutes early, as he had done every day for the past 5 years. He prided himself on being a man who never missed a day's work and never arrived late. As a private security officer contracted to assist TSA employees in managing crowd control, Ron had certain protocols he was supposed to follow. But over the years, he had morphed these into his personal brand of authority. For him, the job was less about safety and more about power. Standing well over 6 feet tall, Ron used his height to loom over travelers. He had a strict, no-nonsense glare that could freeze a person mid-sentence. An imposing figure dressed in a crisp white shirt, dark slacks, and an oversized silver badge, Ron relished each moment he spent telling passengers what to do. If someone took too long to remove a belt or a jacket, he let out an exaggerated sigh, ensuring they felt every ounce of his impatience. If an elderly couple struggled to understand instructions, he tapped his foot with a look of exaggerated pity. It was little acts of intimidation that fueled Ron's ego day after day. This morning, the lines snaked around the checkpoint, thick with weary travelers. Spring break was in full swing, and families with noisy kids and piles of luggage had flooded the airport. Ron stepped up to his assigned position, the roped-off area where IDs were checked against boarding passes. Next to him stood 2 actual TSA agents, carefully scanning each passenger's documents and sending them through. But Ron had a habit of interjecting, pointing out suspicious behaviors that often proved to be nothing more than an overstuffed backpack or a pair of sandals that beeped in the metal detector. As he watched the lines inch forward, Ron felt his usual surge of self-importance. He loved this moment before the rush, the moment when he decided who got singled out for additional screening and who breezed through. It was a heady power, and he wore it like a second skin. A tall man in a business suit approached, and Ron let him pass with a bored wave. Next came a young mother with a stroller. He made her wait, claiming he had to inspect the stroller more closely. She stood aside, fumbling with the baby's blanket, her face flush with embarrassment and anger. Ron pretended he was doing his job, but in truth, he gained a peculiar satisfaction from making people wait. And if they happened to be people he felt were beneath him for whatever reason, so much the better. In the middle of the line stood Yolanda Brooks, a poised black woman in her early 30s. She dressed simply comfortable jeans, a neat button-down blouse, and sneakers. Her hair was styled in neat braids that fell just below her shoulders, and she pulled behind her a small carry-on bag. Yolanda glanced at her watch, noting that she still had ample time before her flight. She looked around, observing the security area with a keen eye. She was here on an official mission. As an undercover TSA inspector, Yolanda had been assigned to investigate ongoing complaints about passenger harassment and discriminatory practices at major airports around the country. Hartsfield-Jackson, one of the busiest airports on the planet, was a prime location for such an investigation. The complaints that had filtered through official channels mentioned a tall security officer who seemed to target passengers, particularly those of certain races or travelers who appeared to speak limited English. Yolanda had read the file thoroughly. It all pointed to Ron Carter. Ron, of course, knew none of this. As soon as he spotted Yolanda, something about her, maybe her calm demeanor, maybe the color of her skin, made him decide she was the next person he would hassle. She was too composed, in his opinion, as though she didn't fear him at all. He wanted to chip away at that calm exterior, see how quickly he could make her flustered. Yolanda stepped up when it was her turn. She offered a polite smile, handed her ID and boarding pass to the TSA agent, and then glanced at Ron out of the corner of her eye. The TSA agent checked her documents without fuss. Then, right as the agent was about to wave her through, Ron cleared his throat. "Halt," he said, his baritone voice cutting through the chatter. "Step aside for additional screening." The TSA agent looked puzzled. There was nothing suspicious about Yolanda's ID or her tickets. But Ron gave a curt nod, and the agent's confusion turned into resignation. Ron was known to be persistent, and it was often easier just to step aside and let him do his job. Yolanda arched an eyebrow. She was fully prepared for this indeed. She'd anticipated it. "Is there a reason you're pulling me aside, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but with an undercurrent of steel. Ron smirked. "Just a routine check," he said, motioning for a female agent to come forward. "Nothing to worry about, ma'am." Yolanda's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a rush of adrenaline. This was her mission in motion. She had to record, observe, and document any improper behavior. She had a small recording device, discreetly hidden in her carry-on. As the female agent patted her down, Yolanda stayed quiet, enduring the prolonged search that Ron insisted upon. Others in line watched with sympathetic eyes, noticing that Yolanda seemed to be singled out for no apparent reason. This was not an unfamiliar sight. Sometimes random checks happened, but there was something about the way Ron hovered over the procedure, a sneer twisting his lips, that made onlookers uncomfortable. When the search ended, Yolanda thanked the agent, picked up her bag, and continued through the checkpoint. Ron, however, was not done with her. He motioned her over to the side again. "Let's have a look inside that carry-on too," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. Yolanda suppressed a sigh. She placed her carry-on bag on a table, unzipped it, and let Ron rummage through her belongings. Her neatly folded clothes, her toiletries in a clear plastic bag, a paperback novel, and a laptop. Ron took his time, prodding each item as though it might contain contraband. When he finished, Yolanda asked quietly, "Is everything in order, officer?" Ron's eyes flickered. He wasn't a formal TSA agent, and she clearly recognized that, but addressing him as officer fueled his ego. He nodded with mock seriousness. "Yes, for now," he said. "Move along." Yolanda walked away, noticing that her heart pounded not from fear or nervousness, but from anger. She channeled her emotion into focus. She was here to see exactly this sort of behavior. Her job was to gather enough evidence to ensure real accountability. This was only the beginning. Beyond the security checkpoint, Yolanda found a quiet corner near a row of gates undergoing renovation. Construction walls blocked the view, giving her the privacy she needed to collect her thoughts and make her quick notes. She used a secure app on her phone to log the incident, the time, the specific checkpoint, a detailed physical description of Ron and the nature of his behavior. She typed swiftly, glancing around to ensure no one observed her. Part of Yolanda's undercover protocol involved traveling under a pseudonym and using carefully curated background details to avoid arousing suspicion. Her boarding pass marked her as Yvonne Bailey, traveling to Chicago O'Hare for a business conference. The real flight was, of course, just a cover. She wasn't planning to board any plane today. Her main task was to test the system, to see if the complaints against Ron Carter were justified. She'd seen enough in just those few minutes to suspect they were, but she needed more. Usually, undercover inspectors had a protocol. They'd go through the line once, note any irregularities, and then stage a second pass at a different checkpoint on another day, sometimes changing attire or approach. However, the thoroughness of the official complaints demanded immediate evidence. If Ron was consistently harassing people, Yolanda aimed to catch him in the act multiple times. She ducked into a restroom to change her blouse and put on a large coat, adjusting her braids under a wide-brimmed hat. Then she took a seat near baggage claim, carefully timing how long it would be before shift changes at the security gate. She had studied the staff schedules as part of her preparation. Ron would likely be on duty for the next few hours. If she made a second pass through the same area, there was a chance he might not recognize her immediately, especially if the lines were busy. Yolanda was also mindful of the many travelers around her, especially those who looked uncertain or frightened by the security process. She had once been in that position herself, years ago, before she joined the TSA. The sense of unease, the fear of being singled out without reason, it was something she understood deeply. And now she was determined to stop officers like Ron from exploiting that fear. After about an hour, she made her move. She booked another test flight, a refundable ticket to Los Angeles, and headed back towards the same security checkpoint. She slipped into line behind a large family with two restless toddlers. By now, the crowd had thinned slightly, but there was still a steady trickle of passengers. She spotted Ron almost immediately. He was leaning against a podium, watching the lines with the same predatory gaze. Yolanda felt a spike of anger, but she forced herself to remain composed. This time, she ensured she stood behind a tall man in a hoodie, hoping it would partially conceal her face. As the line advanced, she noticed Ron snap out of his slouch. He zeroed in on an older African-American gentleman who was walking with a cane. Without explanation, Ron tapped the man on the shoulder and led him away for additional screening. The gentleman looked bewildered, but complied without complaint. Yolanda secretly turned on the audio recorder on her phone, burying it in the pocket of her coat. She slowly inched forward. Another TSA agent checked her ID and boarding pass, and she was waved forward. This time, it looked as if she might slip by Ron unnoticed. Then, at the last moment, Ron's gaze flickered her way. Yolanda felt her stomach tighten. He squinted, leaning forward. She ducked her head, making sure the brim of her hat shielded her face. Just as she was about to breathe a sigh of relief, Ron shouted, "Hey, you there!" Yolanda froze. She turned slowly, her face a careful mask. Ron approached, his hand resting on his belt as though he expected trouble. "You traveling alone?" he asked, looking her up and down. "Yes, sir," Yolanda replied in a meek voice, trying to alter the calm, assertive tone she'd used earlier. Ron narrowed his eyes. "Come with me. We'll need to do a baggage check." Yolanda obliged, stepping aside. She couldn't risk him remembering her from earlier, so she made a show of being flustered, fumbling with her boarding pass as though she were about to drop it. Ron, with an air of impatience, grabbed it from her hand and scrutinized the name. "Yvonne Bailey," he read. "What's your reason for traveling to L.A.? "1. I'm visiting family," Yolanda stammered, trying to sound uncertain. Ron nodded dismissively, then flagged down another female agent to conduct a pat-down. Yolanda glimpsed the other TSA agents exchanging glances. She sensed their silent disapproval of Ron's tactics, but no one openly challenged him. The female agent looked almost apologetic as she conducted the pat-down. Yolanda remained cooperative, lifting her arms and standing still. Again, they searched her carry-on meticulously. It was exactly the same scenario as before, only with a different flight plan and a different blouse. Finally, after an unnecessarily long search, Ron waved her through. "Next time, try to organize your bag better," he said, tossing her items back inside as though they were trash. A wave of quiet rage passed through Yolanda as she carefully repacked her belongings. The second incident in less than 2 hours, definitely not a coincidence. She was beginning to understand the extent of Ron's bias. Yolanda headed to a nearby coffee shop, found a corner seat, and jotted down more notes. She also replayed some of the audio from her phone's recorder, wincing at the rough treatment in Ron's voice. This was no longer a simple routine screening. It felt personal. The pattern was clearer than ever. Ron targeted individuals who were older, non-white, or seemed in any way vulnerable. Yet, Yolanda knew she needed more than just her personal account. Undercover work required building a case that was so airtight, management couldn't ignore it. She sent a coded text to her supervisor, letting them know the mission was proceeding as planned. She also noted that she might stay a day or two longer in Atlanta if necessary to gather additional evidence. When she closed her phone, Yolanda took a deep breath and let her eyes roam the terminal. People rushed about, completely unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. They worried about making flights, losing luggage, or where to find the best airport snack. Very few suspected that a security officer could be using his position to humiliate and terrorize passengers. Her mind drifted back to her early life in Chicago, her father's dedication to community policing. He'd been a local officer who believed in protecting and serving everyone, regardless of race or social status. He used to say, "If you let the uniform turn into an ego trip, you're not fit to wear it." Yolanda had carried that principle into her own career, and now here she was, working to hold accountable those who used their uniform for exactly that, an ego trip. Around noon, Yolanda decided to alter her strategy. She noticed that Ron had left the checkpoint for what was likely his lunch break. She wandered the concourses, searching for potential witnesses, passengers who might have had an unpleasant encounter with him. Though approaching them directly could risk her cover, she found subtle ways to make casual conversation. She struck up a talk with a woman who was traveling alone and seemed upset. The woman spoke of being treated rudely by an oversized security guy, though she was too stressed to say much else. Later, Yolanda encountered an elderly couple seated near a gate, looking visibly shaken. She offered a polite smile and asked if they needed help. They revealed that the husband had just been taken aside for a random screening that felt humiliating. They didn't recognize any names, but the description, tall man, large presence, condescending tone, matched Ron perfectly. Each story became another puzzle piece in Yolanda's growing case file. She took mental notes, carefully storing every detail. The scale of the problem was apparent. Ron wasn't just rude, he was systematically humiliating people. And she would make sure the TSA had the evidence they needed to address it. The next morning, Yolanda arrived early. She wore a different outfit, sporting a large scarf that partially covered her face. She carried a rolling duffel bag this time, blending in with the crowd returning or heading off after the busy travel weekend. She knew Ron's shift typically started around 7 a.m. She positioned herself at a coffee kiosk near the security checkpoint, sipping a latte slowly and waiting to catch sight of him. Sure enough, Ron strutted in at precisely 6:45 am. He took his position, scanned the lines, and cracked his knuckles in anticipation. Yolanda's stomach churned at the sight. Today, she intended not just to observe, but also to push for a more egregious act that she could document thoroughly. A single humiliating encounter might be written off as a misunderstanding, but a pattern of harassment consistent, targeted, and well documented was irrefutable. She watched from her vantage point, seeing how Ron singled out a middle-aged Asian woman. He questioned her accent, demanded she remove her shoes and jacket, then claimed he needed to inspect her carry-on for questionable items. The woman looked near tears as she was forced to stand to the side. Yolanda recorded as much as she could on her phone, capturing Ron's gestures, though she couldn't catch audio from this distance. Next, a young black teenager who was traveling alone stepped up. Ron glared at the boy's ID, asking him a barrage of personal questions: where he went to school, why he was traveling, who paid for his ticket. The kid answered timidly, shrinking under Ron's authoritarian glare. Although the TSA agent next to Ron gave him a disapproving glance, she said nothing. After a few minutes of hostility, Ron barked, "Go on! Stop wasting our time!" Yolanda's jaw tightened. How many times had Ron done this in the past year alone? The number of complaints lodged against him might be a fraction of the times he'd actually harassed someone. Many passengers likely never bothered to file a formal grievance, thinking it would go nowhere. That was precisely why undercover inspectors like Yolanda existed, to expose wrongdoing that slipped through the cracks. By 7:30 am, Yolanda decided to act. She picked up her duffel bag and joined a security line feeding into Ron's station. She planned to present a scenario that would irritate him. She'd pretend confusion, fumble with her documents, and possibly speak in a low voice as though English wasn't her first language. In short, she'd become his ideal target. Sure enough, as soon as Yolanda reached the front, Ron noticed her. Though she was partially disguised, he seemed suspicious. "ID and boarding pass," he demanded, his tone thick with exasperation. Yolanda handed over a carefully crafted fake ID, one that her TSA division had authorized for undercover use, and a boarding pass for a flight to Dallas-Fort Worth. Ron stared at the ID, then at her, then back at the ID. He cocked his head to one side. "Where's your final destination?" he asked, tapping his foot. Dallas," Yolanda mumbled, lowering her gaze. Ron raised an eyebrow. "Business or pleasure?" she shrugged. "Meeting friends," she whispered. Ron handed the documents to the TSA agent next to him, who gave them a quick scan. "They look fine," the agent said, ready to wave Yolanda through, but Ron stepped forward, blocking her path. "We need a pat-down here," he announced. The TSA agent shook her head slightly, but Ron overruled her with a steely glare. Yolanda felt a surge of vindication. He was so blatantly overreaching that even the proper TSA employee seemed uncomfortable. The pat-down dragged on, and once again Ron insisted on searching her duffel bag item by item. When he got to a small pocket, he found a makeup bag with a few cosmetics inside. He held it up as though he'd discovered illegal contraband. "What's all this? You planning to bring anything else on board?" he asked sarcastically. Yolanda feigned anxiety. "It's just makeup," she said softly. "Sure it is," Ron muttered. He unzipped it, pulled out lip gloss, eyeliner, a small mirror. Each item he tossed on the table with an unnecessary flourish, taking his sweet time. Passengers behind her started to grumble. The line was backing up. "Is that everything?" Yolanda asked, trying to inject a quaver into her voice. Ron shrugged as though unimpressed. "Yeah, you're good," he said at last, tossing her items back into the bag. "Next time, be more organized. These lines are long enough without people like you causing delays." Yolanda stuffed her things back into the duffel bag. She turned away, her ears burning with fury, but also with satisfaction. Every minute of this was on record, and it added fuel to the fire she was building. She knew it was only a matter of time before she had enough evidence to confront him. Over the next 2 days, Yolanda stayed in Atlanta longer than her supposed flight schedule implied. She moved between different terminals, observing Ron from multiple vantage points. She watched him intercept travelers who spoke with an accent or who simply looked uneasy. She recorded their stories whenever possible, sometimes as covert video and audio, sometimes as written notes. She also noted how other security personnel reacted. Some seemed intimidated by Ron's overbearing manner. Others probably felt it wasn't their place to challenge a fellow officer on the job. One afternoon, Yolanda hung around near a row of airline check-in counters, discreetly observing from behind a large pillar. She witnessed a heartbreaking scene. A Spanish-speaking family with limited English approached Ron, confusion evident on their faces. They handed him boarding passes, which, from a distance, looked valid. Ron began shouting at them, as though raising his voice would magically make them understand English. The mother clutched the father's arm, fear in her eyes. Their young daughter looked on the verge of tears. Only when a bilingual bystander intervened did the situation calm down. But the humiliation was done. Yolanda was outraged. She took detailed notes and quickly approached the bilingual passenger afterward, praising him for stepping in. He nodded and explained that Ron was practically yelling, "Your documents are questionable," even though they had legitimate travel papers. The bystander added, "That guy was definitely looking to pick a fight." Yolanda thanked him, keeping her cover story vague. She claimed she was a journalist writing about travel experiences. Though not entirely true, it kept suspicion at bay. That evening, Yolanda returned to her hotel room. She laid out all her gathered evidence, recorded audio files, video clips, personal testimonies, and notes. The sheer volume of it shocked even her. In just a few days, she had enough to paint a damning portrait of Ron Carter's abuse of authority. The next step was to deliver her findings to TSA management, but she wanted to make sure they had an undeniable case, one that would force them to take corrective action. As she arranged her materials, she thought about her father again. His sense of justice and fairness was her guiding star in moments like this. She remembered him telling her stories about bad apples in law enforcement, how their unchecked arrogance tainted the entire force's reputation. He'd said, "It's your duty to shine a light on those who misuse their badge, because if you don't, who will?" On her final morning in Atlanta, Yolanda awoke with a determined calm settling over her. She knew this would be the day to confront Ron head-on. Days of quietly gathering evidence, audio recordings, eyewitness accounts, and her own experiences had led to this moment. All that remained was to ensure the right people saw exactly how Ron operated. She carefully reviewed her notes before heading out. The file she'd collected on Ron Carter was extensive: times, dates, checkpoint locations, targeted individuals, patterns of intimidation. Most alarming was the consistency. He always singled out passengers who seemed vulnerable, either because of race, language barriers, or age. Now, the clock was ticking. Yolanda had discovered that the TSA's regional director, James Robinson, would be visiting Hartsfield-Jackson for an official inspection that very afternoon. If ever there was a chance to catch Ron in the act with unimpeachable witnesses present, this was it. That morning, she dressed differently than she had on previous days. Gone were the low-key outfits and disguises. Instead, Yolanda chose a crisp charcoal suit, a tailored blouse, and low heels that clicked on the airport's tiled floor with each decisive step. She wanted Ron to see her as an imposing figure, someone who might even intimidate him. A brand new laptop bag replaced her usual carry-on. She had a plan to play on Ron's tendency to overstep, especially with people he perceived as too confident or suspicious in ways that only made sense in his twisted logic. Before stepping into the security area, Yolanda quietly contacted 2 TSA supervisors who had been discreetly assisting her investigation. Although they'd known an undercover inspector was in the airport, they hadn't realized it was Yolanda specifically until she revealed her credentials. After their initial shock, both supervisors expressed a mixture of relief and anxiety. They admitted that rumors and complaints about Ron had trickled in for months, but nothing concrete had stuck. Passengers would occasionally file complaints, but many never bothered, thinking the process was too cumbersome or doubting any real change would happen. Besides, the contracting security firm that employed Ron often deflected blame and insisted on more proof. In a small side office near baggage claim, Yolanda laid out the story in detail for the supervisors, each piece of evidence systematically presented. Every harrowing detail seemed to weigh on them, especially the repeated mentions of racial bias. One supervisor, a serious-looking woman named Cassandra Fields, kept shaking her head. "I knew he was aggressive, but not to this extent," she murmured. Her colleague, Mark Alvarez, sighed in frustration. "We've tried to keep tabs on him, but every time we file a concern, the security company insists we're mistaken," he said. "They claim it's just Ron being thorough. We never had definitive proof until you showed up." Yolanda didn't mince words. "I have more than enough to prove this is deliberate harassment. But for maximum impact, we need him caught in the act, and we need people who can act on it right away." She looked back and forth between the two supervisors. "That's where you both come in." Cassandra straightened. "The regional director's walkthrough is scheduled for 2:00 p.m., she said, checking the clock on the wall. "We have a few hours to set this up." "Exactly," Yolanda agreed. "We'll have to be deliberate. The more official eyes on him, the better. If Mr. Robinson and perhaps a few other senior officials are present, they can't ignore what they see with their own eyes." Mark exchanged a concerned glance with Cassandra. "Ron's shift started an hour ago, so he'll be active at the same checkpoint he's usually assigned to. We'll have to coordinate carefully so he doesn't spot us conferring with the regional director." Cassandra nodded. "We'll handle the logistics. We'll position ourselves nearby, and when you approach, we'll signal the regional director to come watch from a few feet away. You can't risk losing the element of surprise, though, so be ready to draw Ron's attention in a way that forces him to show his true colors." Yolanda exhaled, feeling both tension and resolve surge through her. "I know it's risky. He's seen me a few times, but I've always changed clothes or worn disguises. Today, I want to push his buttons just enough to make him overstep, call me aside, rummage through my belongings, anything that demonstrates his hostility. With a bit of luck, he'll do exactly what he's done all week." A flicker of admiration appeared in Cassandra's eyes. "This is bold. Usually, an undercover inspector never breaks cover so publicly. But I see why you want to do it. Once we witness him acting out, we can confront him immediately. And with the regional director present, we can't be swept under the rug." Mark agreed, though he still looked uneasy. "It's critical we time this perfectly. If he spots any of us too soon, he might dial down his behavior." Yolanda checked her phone, ensuring the covert recording app was fully operational. "Don't worry. He'll be focused on me, not on you." She paused, the weight of the task pressing on her. "I've read enough of the passengers' stories to know how he operates. He craves that sense of control, and he loves picking apart anyone's belongings to humiliate them. I'll give him the chance." They spent the next half hour mapping out precise positions. Mark would stand near the corridor that led to the checkpoint, pretending to answer passenger questions. Cassandra would linger by a kiosk that sold neck pillows and phone chargers. Once Ron engaged Yolanda, a quick text from Cassandra would bring the regional director and another senior TSA staffer to a vantage point. All the while, Yolanda would record the encounter on her phone, which would be tucked into an inside pocket of her laptop bag, discreetly capturing audio and hopefully some video. Finally, they wrapped up the plan. Cassandra reached out to the regional director's office, quietly relaying the situation without specifying every detail. She simply mentioned an ongoing internal investigation that required his immediate attention once he arrived. The director's assistant agreed to keep him available and not to announce his presence to the checkpoint staff. ensuring maximum surprise. Yolanda could see the anxiety etched across both supervisors' faces. This was, after all, a significant risk. Yet neither wavered. They knew that, if Ron wasn't stopped now, his abuses might go on for months or years longer, leaving more passengers humiliated and frightened. As she left the side office and blended into the terminal crowd, Yolanda felt a surge of adrenaline. She couldn't help thinking of her father again, his unwavering sense of duty, his words echoing in her mind. Never let the uniform turn you into a bully. It's meant for service and protection. She wondered how many other Rons existed across the country's airports, abusing the power entrusted to them. Today, at least, one of them would face consequences. Walking toward the checkpoint, she rehearsed her planned moves in her head. She would approach confidently, show her ID and boarding pass to the official TSA agent, and then accidentally drop her laptop bag, creating a small, chaotic moment that would almost certainly attract Ron's attention. If her intuition was correct, the sight of expensive electronics and a well-dressed passenger acting even slightly flustered would be enough to set him off. Yolanda clenched her fists, breathing deeply to calm her pulse. This confrontation would be the climax of her mission in Atlanta, and everything needed to go exactly right. If Ron reacted too mildly or recognized her from earlier screenings, their evidence might not hold the same power. If he turned violent or threatened her physically, she'd have to rely on Cassandra and Mark to intervene. Still, the risks were worth it, because the airport and the travelers passing through it needed protection from this man's intimidation. As she emerged near the security lines, she spotted Ron's tall figure looming by the roped-off barriers, scanning faces with the same arrogance that had caught her attention on day one. A grim sense of purpose settled over her. Soon, he would either lose that sneer or face a reckoning for what he had done to countless passengers. A short text beeped on her phone from Cassandra, "RD on the way, be ready." Yolanda glanced at the overhead screens. It was nearing 2:00 p.m. The plan was in motion. She smoothed her suit jacket, gripping the handle of her laptop case a little tighter, and stepped into line. Today was the day Ron Carter would finally meet his match, and it would happen in front of the very authorities who could put a permanent stop to his reign of intimidation. The appointed hour arrived. Yolanda, wearing her business suit and carrying her laptop bag, joined the line at the checkpoint where Ron was stationed. She purposely made sure she was the only one in line wearing formal business attire, hoping Ron would be suspicious, perhaps thinking she was an attorney or someone who might threaten his sense of power. She inched forward, counting down the seconds. She spotted one of the TSA supervisors watching inconspicuously from the edge of the checkpoint, cleverly hidden behind a kiosk. The other supervisor was out of sight, presumably waiting with the regional director. All the puzzle pieces were in place. Finally, it was Yolanda's turn. She handed her ID and boarding pass to the official TSA agent on duty. The agent looked at them, verified her information, and prepared to wave her through. Ron, who was checking a different line, glanced over. At first, he seemed ready to ignore her, possibly because her professional demeanor didn't fit his usual profile for harassment. But just as she moved forward, she stumbled on purpose, dropping her laptop bag, letting the computer slide out slightly. She pretended to scramble, looking flustered. That was the trigger. Ron's eyes gleamed with opportunity. He strode over, pointing at Yolanda. "Hey, you! Step aside. I need to see what's in that bag." Yolanda pulled in a breath. "I just dropped it," she said, feigning embarrassment. "Is there a problem?" Ron sized her up. "I decide if there's a problem. Hand it over." She reluctantly obeyed, passing her laptop to him. He opened it, turning it on without regard for her privacy or for standard screening protocols. "Any sensitive files on here?" he asked mockingly. "I have work documents," Yolanda stammered. A twisted grin appeared on Ron's face. Work documents, huh? You some kind of spy? Maybe you got something in here you don't want us to see." Yolanda saw the nearby TSA agent's face pale. This was well beyond standard procedure. Ron rummaged through her laptop bag, pulling out cables, a mouse, and some folded papers. Yolanda glanced around. The line was backing up again. Passengers watched with curiosity and concern. Ron was in full harassment mode now. "I think we need a full bag check," he announced loudly, "and maybe a pat-down too." Yolanda raised her voice slightly, just enough to draw attention. "But you already have my laptop, and the TSA agent cleared my boarding pass. Why are you doing this?" "Because it's my job to keep this airport safe," he snarled, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "And I don't trust you, lady." Those were the words Yolanda had been waiting for. She locked eyes with the nearby TSA supervisor, giving a subtle nod. Immediately, the supervisor signaled. The regional director approached with a second supervisor in tow. Ron was too absorbed in his intimidation routine to notice them at first. He grabbed Yolanda by the arm, steering her toward a secondary screening area. "Let's go," he barked. "We're doing a thorough inspection." Suddenly, a calm but firm voice sliced through the tension. "That won't be necessary, Officer Carter." Ron froze, turning to see the regional director's stern gaze fixed upon him. The director was a tall, authoritative figure who wore a crisp suit and an official TSA badge that outranked anything Ron had ever seen. Who are you?" Ron demanded, confusion flickering across his face. The director didn't miss a beat. "I'm James Robinson, Regional Director for the TSA. And you, Officer Carter, appear to be in serious violation of standard security protocols." Before Ron could stammer a response, Yolanda reached into her coat pocket and produced her official TSA inspector credentials. She held them up for him to see. "My name is Yolanda Brooks," she said in a firm voice that carried through the immediate area. "I'm an undercover TSA inspector, here to investigate allegations of harassment and misconduct." "You just made our job easier." The color drained from Ron's face. His eyes darted around, looking for a lifeline. The few TSA agents nearby, who had often been forced to tolerate his behavior, visibly relaxed. As though freed from an invisible chain, passengers watched the scene with shock and curiosity. Some took out their phones to record. "You," Ron sputtered, stepping back. This is a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Yolanda said coldly. "I've documented multiple instances of you targeting passengers without cause, harassing them, and exceeding your authority." She nodded to the supervisors, who stepped forward. One of them patted Ron on the shoulder and gestured for him to remove his security badge. The director's voice was like iron. "We have enough evidence to place you on immediate suspension, pending an investigation. For now, hand over your badge and step away from the checkpoint." Ron's face twisted in disbelief and anger. He opened his mouth to protest, but words failed him. The humiliating spectacle he had orchestrated for countless passengers had now reversed course, shining a harsh spotlight on his own misconduct. Time seemed to freeze the instant Ron Carter was exposed. One moment, he was barking orders and rifling through Yolanda's belongings. The next, he stood paralyzed by the sight of TSA Regional Director James Robinson, flanked by two supervisors whose collective disapproval was unmistakable. Gasps and whispers rippled through the line of travelers as phone cameras rose into the air, capturing the startling reversal of fortunes. Ron's face drained of color. He tried to speak, maybe to argue, maybe to deny, but all that emerged was a strangled "This can't be," before the words died in his throat. Airport security managers arrived in short order, stepping in to escort him away from the checkpoint. Yolanda watched with quiet satisfaction, credentials still clutched in her hand, as the very man who had humiliated so many was now publicly under scrutiny. The crowd of passengers parted reluctantly, many wanting to see how this drama would conclude. A few travelers approached Yolanda with tentative questions. Was this real? Had they really just seen an undercover operation? Yolanda offered brief, reassuring replies, careful not to divulge any details that might compromise her continued responsibilities or the TSA's internal processes. "The matter is in good hands now," she said gently, offering a comforting smile. "Thank you for your patience." With the immediate crisis contained, Cassandra and Mark stepped forward, taking Yolanda aside. They led her through a side corridor, away from the glare of phones and wide-eyed spectators. Relief and lingering adrenaline made every breath feel sharper, yet the day's work wasn't finished. In a nearby conference room, the regional director was waiting. Yolanda entered the room to see James Robinson pacing back and forth, a deep crease etched into his brow. Despite his calm demeanor at the checkpoint, he now appeared visibly disturbed, equal parts angered and embarrassed that such misconduct had continued on his watch. Once Yolanda, Cassandra, and Mark were seated, the director let out a long breath. "All right, let's lay it on the table," he said, resting his hands on the back of a chair. "I want every piece of evidence we have, and I do mean everything." Yolanda nodded, placing her phone and a stack of notes onto the table. Over the next half hour, she systematically presented her evidence. Short video clips showing Ron interrogating passengers with heavy-handed hostility, audio recordings of him shouting at vulnerable travelers, transcripts of witness testimonies, and her own formal notes describing multiple incidents. With each new revelation, the director's expression darkened. Cassandra and Mark chimed in occasionally, corroborating the mounting accusations. They recounted previous complaints they'd received, but could never substantiate. Each time they explained, the contracting security firm had deflected blame or insisted there was no clear proof. As the pieces fell into place, Director Robinson shook his head. "I've had complaints about Officer Carter before," he admitted quietly. "I had my suspicions, but I never had anything this conclusive. Passengers would complain verbally or leave vague statements on comment cards. Without direct evidence, the security firm brushed them off, claiming we were exaggerating. But now," he trailed off, clearly disgusted. Cassandra exchanged a glance with Mark. "We regret not being able to push harder, sir," she said softly. "We tried to monitor him, but he always backed down or passed blame onto passengers. If not for Miss Brooks's undercover work, we might have never exposed him so thoroughly." The director grimaced. "He's not just unprofessional, he's actively endangering our mission. The TSA was established to protect and serve every single traveler, yet Ron Carter was wielding his position to intimidate and discriminate." He ran a hand over his chin, shaking his head in frustration. "It's a betrayal of our core values." Yolanda cleared her throat, trying to hold back her own wave of anger. "His actions go beyond ignorance or poor training. It's targeted harassment, especially against minorities, non-English speakers, or anyone who appears easily intimidated." At times, he seemed to relish the fear he caused. Mark flipped open a binder, pointing to a page filled with highlights of Yolanda's recordings. Passengers described him as someone who thrives on power. He'd pick the most vulnerable target in line and make them feel like criminals. He paused, glancing at the director. "It's a miracle we haven't faced lawsuits or major media coverage yet." With a weary sigh, Director Robinson straightened his posture. "Well, that stops now. As of this moment, I'm terminating our contract with the security firm that employed Carter. We'll cite multiple breaches of standard operating procedures and discrimination. I'll also recommend we ban him from working in any security capacity at this airport again." His voice hardened as he looked around the room. "This story could blow up in the press, and if it does, we'll be transparent. We'll provide the facts." Make it clear. We won't tolerate this. A long silence followed a collective acknowledgement that they were facing a systemic issue, not just a single bad actor. Yolanda broke the hush. "Thank you for taking immediate action," she said. "There's still a lot of work to be done to ensure no one else abuses their power like Ron did, but this is a crucial first step." The director nodded and offered a tight smile. "Your work here was vital, Miss Brooks. I'll submit your full report to TSA headquarters with my strongest recommendation. I promise it won't end up buried under bureaucratic red tape." Yolanda felt a wave of relief, tempered by lingering fury that Ron had been allowed to run amok for so long. She breathed deeply, letting that mixture of emotions ground her. "I appreciate that. If you need additional support or follow-up statements, I'm available." Cassandra looked to Yolanda, pride and admiration in her eyes. "Thank you. I can't tell you how many times we felt our hands were tied. You've changed that." When the meeting concluded, the room fell silent for a moment, as though everyone needed a second to absorb the gravity of what had happened. They all understood that while Ron Carter was now removed, other officers might be out there, abusing the trust placed in them. Yet, this victory felt significant, like a ray of hope piercing through the cracks of a flawed system. As Yolanda stepped into the hallway, she found herself caught between relief and a renewed sense of purpose. Outside, travelers bustled through the concourses, most of them blissfully unaware of the showdown that had just taken place. She smiled faintly, grateful that, at least for today, justice had prevailed in an environment too often governed by fear and misuse of authority. Still, she couldn't help thinking of her next steps. There would always be another airport, another complaint, another person who needed someone to stand up against bullying and bias. And for the first time since her arrival, Yolanda felt confident that the change she was fighting for, however incremental, could ultimately reshape how security was done across the country. After the meeting, Yolanda left the conference room and walked through the bustling terminals, reflecting on the harrowing experience. It struck her how easy it was for people like Ron to exploit a uniform if unchecked. But it also renewed her faith in the power of accountability and the importance of her job. She passed by the very checkpoint where the showdown had occurred. The staff had changed shifts. A new team of TSA agents greeted travelers politely, directing them with clear instructions. No sign of intimidation or harassment. She took a moment to observe, noticing the relief on some passengers' faces. In the days that followed, news of Ron's dismissal spread around the airport, with rumors swirling about an undercover operation that had exposed him. Some employees whispered Yolanda's name like a legend. Others simply carried on, grateful they no longer had to see Ron's towering figure looming over them or the passengers. Yolanda herself wrapped up her official paperwork, forwarded her findings to the National TSA office, and prepared to leave Atlanta. Before she departed, she made a quiet visit to a local coffee shop near the airport. She took a seat by the window, sipped a latte, and watched planes ascend into the sky. She felt a sense of closure, but also a drive to continue her mission elsewhere. There were other airports, other complaints, and likely other Rons. Her work was far from done. In that moment, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her supervisor at TSA headquarters. "Excellent work in Atlanta. Prepare for next assignment. We need you in Denver soon." Yolanda smiled to herself. The cycle would continue, but so would she. Standing up for what was right never ended. It was a lifelong pursuit. She gathered her things, left the coffee shop, and headed toward the airport exit. She had a flight to catch, a real one this time. And that, my friends, is how one woman's quiet determination brought down an arrogant bully who'd been terrorizing travelers for far too long. Yolanda Brooks showed us the power of one person, armed with courage and evidence, to stop abuse of authority in its tracks. It's a story that reminds us never to judge a book by its cover, because you never know who might be watching and who might hold the key to justice. If you found this story inspiring and eye-opening, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more real-life dramas, undercover investigations, and stories that matter. Let's spread the word that fairness, respect, and dignity can still win, even in the most unexpected places. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more incredible stories coming your way.